Well, good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you tonight. I'm so proud to learn of your mission. It is just heartwarming to see those slides and those people so engaged in Israel and doing such great things. Thank you so much for inviting us here. My wife and I are very, very proud to be a part of this evening. Colonel Jacobs, sir, you are a giant. Heroism occurs at the intersection of character and circumstance. I'll say it again. Heroism occurs at the intersection of character and circumstance. And that is the way it was for Captain Ben Salomon, U.S. Army Dental Corps, who sacrificed his life to save the lives of the wounded who were entrusted to his care during the bloody battle for Saipan on the 7th of July in 1944. It was also circumstance that it cost to take 58 years for his sacrifice to be recognized with award of the Medal of Honor. So there are two stories here. The story of Captain Ben and his sacrifice, and then there's the story of the medal. Ben was born on the 1st of September 1914 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was an only child. His youth was most remarkable for his athletic skills, his charm, and his innate leadership ability. He attended Marquette University for a short period of time, then transferred to the University of Southern California to complete his pre-dental studies, and then matriculated in the dental school at the University of Southern California. And he graduated in 1937 and was practicing dentistry in Los Angeles when his number came up in the autumn of 1940 in one of the first drafts held by the Selective Service Administration. After being drafted, not as a dental officer, but as an enlisted man, he attended basic training and then was assigned to the 102nd Infantry Regiment. Now, this regiment was an orphan regiment, unlike other regiments assigned to a division. It was more of a holding place for manpower who would be used where needed. Well, after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December 1941, there was a great need for manpower to populate the small islands of the South Pacific, little specks in the ocean that were waypoints on the flight paths to our allies in Australia and New Zealand. Ben was assigned to one of those specks in the ocean. There wasn't much to do there, other than to build fortifications in case the Japanese should attack. And the other thing to do was to train on all the weapons that were common to the infantrymen. And to make it interesting, the regimental officers decided that they would have competitions. And it seemed it didn't make any difference what competition it was, whether it was the pistol, the rifle, the bayonet, or the machine gun, Ben would win all the competitions. It wasn't long before Ben was promoted to sergeant and became the chief of a machine gun section in the heavy weapons company of the regiment. Things were fine on the island for Ben, but decisions being made back at the War Department were soon going to change everything for him. In 1944, with the first draft, the War Department thought there were plenty of dentists. They were wrong. By 1941, they realized that they needed to have more dentists in uniform to take care of the oral needs of the force. They found that they had drafted 100 dentists or so as enlisted members, like Ben. And so they sent out letters encouraging them to seek appointment as commissioned dental officers. Ben did not respond to that letter. Encouragement changed to directives in the autumn of 1941, and the Army began to draft the dentists. And over the course of the war, nearly 13,000 dentists were conscripted to serve the force. But Ben got another letter this time, and this time it was orders and said, Ben, you're going to be commissioned as a first lieutenant in the United States Army Dental Corps. Again, he tried to ward this off. One of his commanding officers even recommended that he be commissioned as a first lieutenant of infantry. But this was war, and orders are orders. And so he was commissioned in August of 1942, and he was transferred to Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. And he picked up his practice of dentistry. Apparently it came back to him fairly easily. He was highly respected and esteemed by the patients that he treated, but his practice was not usual in any respect. In the morning he would see patients, but in the afternoon he returned to the field with the 105th Infantry Regiment, and he would teach infantry tactics. And his commanding officer said he was the best teacher of infantry tactics that they had. Well, in late May of 1944, it was time for those infantry tactics to be put into use. And the 105th Infantry Regiment, which is a part of the 27th Infantry Division, was assigned to help the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions eject the Japanese defenders of the island of Saipan in the Marianas Islands group. There were 30,000 Japanese defenders there, well entrenched in caves and on cliffs. They had strong positions on the island. The force arrived to Saipan on the 15th of June. Initially, Ben's unit was in the reserve. But on the 21st of June, they were given the mission to clear the Nafutan Peninsula. Very rugged terrain overlooking Naslito Airfield. It had to be cleared. It was very difficult, and Ben Salomon, the 105th Infantry Regiment dentist, took on the position of being the 2nd Battalion medical surgeon, a dental officer, but now he was acting in the capacity of the surgeon for the battalion. After they cleared the Nafutan Peninsula, the whole unit that survived was put to the northwest side of the island. And they found themselves near the coastline on the evening of the 6th of July, 1944. The 2nd Battalion was up against the shoreline with the 1st Battalion to their right. They established a defensive perimeter with the machine guns forward to protect the unit. And he established his battalion aid station 50 meters to the rear and about 30 meters from the coastline. Across the way, Lieutenant General Sato of the Japanese forces was preparing his men for that evening as well. He wrote a special order. He lauded the troops for their conduct, but he admitted that they were out of ammunition, out of weapons, out of food, and that they could not continue much longer. And so what he did, he ordered a suicide charge in which every one of the Japanese soldiers was supposed to give up their life by taking 10 American lives. And then Lieutenant General Sato and the other senior Japanese commander on the island, none other than Admiral Nagumi, who was the leader of the task force that attacked Pearl Harbor, those two men went off and committed suicide. About midnight, probing advances of the Japanese forces hit the American lines. And soon Ben's small aid station was taking on casualties. About 4:45 in the morning, the attack reached full fury. Some 5,000 to 7,000 Japanese soldiers poured themselves upon the 1st and 2nd Battalion. Witnesses described it as a human tsunami. While Ben was in the aid station, he heard one of the wounded cry out. He looked up to see that a Japanese soldier had entered the aid station and was bayoneting one of the wounded. He grabbed the rifle and shot that Japanese soldier. Then 2 more came through the front flap of the tent. Using that rifle, he clubbed them both, shot one, bayoneted another. Then 4 more crawled under the tent flap. He shot one, bayoneted a second one, headbutted the third, knocked the knife out of the hand out of the fourth, scrambled to get that knife back, stabbed that Japanese soldier to death while one of his colleagues shot the third intruder. Then realizing the seriousness of the situation, Ben went outside the tent to find that the unit had been overrun. He gave an order. He told the medics to get the wounded to the rear and that he'd try to hold them off. And that was the last anybody ever saw Ben Salomon alive. The next day, on the 8th of July, the division commander, Major General George Greiner, accompanied by the division historian, Captain Edmund Love, and several enlisted members, were surveying the carnage of the day before. They came across Ben's body. It was slumped over a machine gun. His finger was still on the trigger. They counted the wounds. He had some 76 wounds. Some were just crude bayonet wounds. Others were crude wounds made from like wooden spears that the Japanese soldiers had fashioned in their absence of weapons. And then they saw that there were 4 separate piles of Japanese dead in front of his machine gun. And they could see from the tracks in the sand and the trail of blood that Ben had struggled to move that machine gun 4 times in the evening, or the early morning hours, to keep a clear field of fire, and that he had killed a total of 98 enemy attackers. In the next few weeks after the battle, Captain Love assembled the documentation, the affidavits, and wrote narratives for award of the Medal of Honor for 3 individuals. Lieutenant Colonel O'Brien, the commander of the 1st Battalion, Captain Ackerman, Company A commander within the 1st Battalion, and Ben Salomon were put forward. The first 2 ultimately received their Medal of Honor posthumously. Ben's recommendation went to the division commander, General Greiner. General Greiner, remember, had seen Ben slumped over that machine gun. What I forgot to tell you was that when he saw Ben over the machine gun, he bent down and cut the Red Cross armlet off Ben's arm. It's a very important fact, because when the recommendation came to General Greiner, he just wrote on it, "Cannot approve this." And words to the effect that Ben was a medic and was not to have taken up arms against the enemy. Now, this is a misperception of the Geneva Convention. Medics have a right to defend themselves, and they have an absolute obligation to protect the wounded entrusted to their care. So the general was wrong, but he didn't submit the award back to the War Department. And the first attempt to recognize Ben with the Medal of Honor failed back in 1944. After the war, Captain Love returned as a civilian to the Pentagon, where he worked in the Center for Military History. He was a prolific writer. He wrote several articles about the battles in the South Pacific with a focus on Saipan and also a focus on the Army's award policy. It always rankled him. One of those articles came to the attention of Ben Salomon's father out in Southern California. And the father wrote the Secretary of War, Judge Robert Patterson. Judge Robert Patterson asked Captain Love to go out to California and talk to Ben's father. He went out to California and had a wonderful conversation with Ben's father. You see, Ben's father never knew how heroically his son had died. Sadly, he had never even received the Purple Heart that Ben had earned. So Judge Patterson asked Captain Love, now Mr. Love, to write a narrative and re-energize the award process. It was a very difficult thing to do, to find witnesses now. Most of the people in that regiment died, either there or in the battle that followed at Okinawa. Captain Love worked very hard on it. In 1951, he had it all put together, but now it was outside the statute of limitations, and it could not be processed. So the second time, the award meets with failure. In the 1960s, Congress passed a public law that allowed the statute of limitations be waived if a member of Congress is involved in the action for a meritorious, valorous award like this. In 1969, Dr. John Engel from the University of Southern California, the dean out there, and Major General Robert Shira gathered together to champion another award recommendation for Ben Salomon and the Medal of Honor. They put the paperwork together. They engaged Edmund Love to help them with this process. Paperwork went forward. The Army Senior Decorations Board voted approval, and then it went to the Secretary of the Army, Stan Reeser, recommended approval, went to the Secretary of Defense and the White House, and they demurred. And the third effort to recognize Ben resulted in failure. In 1979, I was a young resident completing my senior year of my comprehensive dentistry residency program at Fort Knox. I went down to the Hyman Dental meeting at Atlanta, Georgia, and I took a little side trip to visit one of my old mentors, Colonel Clement Daniel Egan. Colonel Egan was now chief of a brand new Army dental clinic, the Ben Salomon Dental Clinic. You see, the Army Medical Department always wanted to recognize Ben's sacrifice, and so they had named this dental clinic in Ben Salomon's honor. And so on a Saturday afternoon, actually St. Patrick's Day, Colonel Egan, gave me a tour of his clinic. And he acquainted me with the story of Ben Salomon and all the efforts that have been made to see that he be recognized in the Medal of Honor. I remember thinking, my golly, what a very, very opportunity to support this recognition for this very, very brave man. I would do so. Well, that opportunity came nearly 2 decades later. In late 1998, I had been selected to be the 23rd Chief of the Army Dental Corps, slated for promotion to Major General, and assigned to the Office of the Surgeon General as the Deputy Surgeon General of the United States Army. I no sooner arrived at the Office of the Surgeon General, and I inquired of our historian, Dr. John Greenwood, what was the status of the Salomon files? Were they available? I was delighted to find out that there was interest in the files out at the University of Southern California. They were celebrating their centennial, and a dentist out there by the name of Dr. Robert West was eager to re-energize the process for the Medal of Honor. And in fact, the Dental Corps historian, Colonel John King, had shared the 1969 files with Dr. West. Dr. West had spoken to Congressman Brad Sherman, and Congressman Sherman was lined up to make sure that we had a waiver of the statute of limitations. So things were looking good at this point in time. And this is 1998, December of 1998. December of 1999, I was delighted when I heard that the Army Senior Decorations Board had recommended approval of the Medal of Honor for Ben Salomon. We were getting there, but I knew there were many steps yet to go, because I had remembered the history from 1969. The next year, my job was to make sure that the staffing action from the Senior Decorations Board to the Secretary of the Army stayed on track. It's not like I'm standing there twisting arms, but it's to remind a bunch of staff officers got lots of actions in their in-basket every day. Budgets and plans and regulations and directives. Remind them, you got this action over here. Keep this moving. 20 January 2001, Inauguration Day. Change of administrations from the Clinton administration to the George W. Bush administration. I got a phone call from my dear friend, the Honorable Mr. P.T. Henry, who was my connection in the Pentagon building. He was the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Manpower Reserve Affairs. He said, Pat, as my last action in my position as the Assistant Secretary, I had the privilege of carrying the completed staff action down to the Secretary of the Army. And the Honorable Louis Caldera, Secretary of the Army, signed recommending the approval of the Medal of Honor. Over the next 8 months, it was staffed through the Office of the Secretary of Defense. And in October of 2001, I got the good news that the National Defense Authorization Act for 2002 included the waiver of the statute of limitations and verbiage that would award the Medal of Honor to Captain Salomon posthumously. On December 28, 2001, when the law was passed and President Bush signed it, I knew now that the award was going to be presented. And now came the long wait for the ceremony. You see, I had a retirement date myself on 10 May, and I was very frightened that I would not be there to see this presentation take place. I remember how delighted I was in early spring. Got a call from the White House that the ceremony had been scheduled. It would take place on the 1st of May in the Rose Garden of the White House. Now, Ben's family was long gone at this time, and as an only child, the family that was left now was the University of Southern California Dental School and the United States Army Dental Corps. And we were proud to stand in that capacity for Ben Salomon. Dr. West accepted the medal from President Bush in a very beautiful ceremony there in the Rose Garden. That day, there were many of the people who helped champion the award for Ben Salomon in attendance. General Shira, who was just shy of his 92nd birthday, was there. It was my honor to escort him and my wife to that ceremony. Mr. Henry was there. Mr. Caldera was there. Dr. John Engel from the University of Southern California Dental School was there. And there were also many Medal of Honor recipients there in attendance. It was a very special day. The next day was the Hall of Heroes ceremony, when the image and the citation for Ben Salomon was enshrined with all the other Medal of Honor recipients in the hall of the Pentagon. And I was there for that ceremony. And at that ceremony, Thomas White, Secretary of the Army, new Secretary of the Army, presented to Dr. West the Purple Heart that Ben Salomon's father had never received back in 1944. That Purple Heart is at the University of Southern California Dental School. Immediately after the ceremony, Dr. West presented the Medal of Honor to me. And I had the privilege of hand-carrying that medal down to Fort Sam Houston, San Antonio, Texas, where on the 10th of May, I had my retirement parade. And my last act of active duty, I left the retirement parade. We walked across the street to the United States Army Medical Department Museum, and I presented Ben Salomon's Medal of Honor to the museum so that museum would have that medal on display forever, and that's where it resides today. And across the country, simultaneously, at Fort Benning, Georgia, they rededicated the Salomon Dental Clinic and hung a new sign in memory of Captain Ben Salomon, Medal of Honor recipient. Now, what are the takeaways from this long story? Well, I see three. The first is, in this crazy and chaotic world, we need people, heroes like Ben Salomon, Colonel Jacobs, whose example guides and inspires us. The second takeaway is there must never be a statute of limitations on doing the right thing. If it takes 58 years or forever, virtue must be recognized. And the third thing is that the great character of one person, like Ben Salomon, brings out the great character in many others. And I remember now people like Dr. Shirer, Dr. Engel, Captain Love, Mr. Henry, Mr. Caldera, General Shinseki, Dr. West, Congressman Sherman, Colonel King, Dr. Greenwood, and many others, although they had never met Ben Salomon, many of them born long after Ben Salomon had passed away. But yet they committed to make sure that his legacy would never be forgotten. And today we know that his legacy of selfless service and personal courage and devotion to duty will always be remembered to inspire each and every one of us. Thank you very much for your kind attention.